Welcome back. Our next guest, Dionne, is a columnist for the Washington Post, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and a professor at Georgetown University, as well as the author of several books on politics. His latest, called Our Divided Political Heart: The Battle for the American Idea in an Age of Discontent, seeks to find a balance between our country's love of individualism as well as community. He's kind enough to join us now from Demos in New York City. EJ, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it was an ambitious task given the environment that we live in right now. And the one thing, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, people agree on is that we've never seen in recent times the polarism that we see on both sides, and it reflects in a Congress that the vast majority of Americans believe to be dysfunctional. From just your history with us here, do you remember a time where it was this bad?
I don't. I mean, fortunately, I am not so old that I lived in the period before the Civil War. I do think that the period around the 1850s had some of this in it. I don't think we're headed towards Civil War now, but I think there was a kind of fundamental argument going on in the country in that period that's similar to where we are now. We've had a lot of discontent. I mean, whenever I am inclined, which I am these days, to say that this polarization is worse than anything I've seen in my lifetime, I think we've never had quite the kind of division that leads to such gridlock in Washington as we've seen, particularly in the last 2 years. And what I talk about in my book is that I think you have on the conservative side a really quite radical change where conservatives who for a long time were very deeply devoted to the idea of community, and many still are at the local level, but have really embraced a kind of radical anti-government individualism that is quite extreme by our standards. You know, Ayn Rand is someone widely read in the United States, but she wasn't regarded as a mainstream figure. And I think that kind of individualism is now much closer to the heart of American conservatism. And I think that's really changed our politics in fundamental ways for the time being.
We've seen divides from everything from slavery, obviously, to wars like Vietnam. It seems that this flashpoint really happened, or at least crystallized, when this president came into office. And if you could go back in history to the very Declaration of Independence and the signers, because throughout the book you talk that, hey, listen, people always believed in freedom and individual liberties here, but at the same time, there was this idea of community, and while they wrestled with it, I don't think they foresaw the idea that people don't even believe in the very idea of government like we hear right now.
No, that's exactly right, and that is a central theme of the book. I like to point out to people, I like to ask crowds the question, what's the first word of the American Constitution? And of course, the first words of the American Constitution are we the people. We're a we country. We were founded on the idea of a we. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, the first part is very much about our commitment to individual freedom, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the very last part of the Declaration is where our founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. They knew that they couldn't achieve the liberty they cherished unless they acted in common. And similarly, where government is concerned, I spend some time in the book talking about people like Alexander Hamilton and Henry Clay and Abraham Lincoln. All of them saw government as playing a vital role in building our country. Hamilton was for a national bank. He wanted the federal government to help make us a manufacturing nation. Henry Clay was for those things too, and also wanted the government to invest a lot in the roads and bridges and canals that pulled us together. And also, by the way, a public education system, which was first really pushed hard in the states in the 1830s and at the national level by Lincoln when he signed the Land-Grant College Act. So we have not been a pure anti-government country. We've also never been a pure anti-market country. And what I'm suggesting in my book is that this tension we have between individualism and community is not an unhealthy tension. It's a healthy tension. These are both worthy aspirations. At times we need to correct in one direction or the other, but to pretend that we are a country that disdains government and sees only individual rights without the support individual rights need for the community as our central goal, misunderstands who we are as a people.
But let's talk about the people for a second, because Dick Lugar, who was a giant in the Senate, been there for 36 years, ingrained obviously in Indiana politics. He lost his primary this year to a guy by the name of Richard Murdoch, who, when asked about bipartisanship, said the following, quote, "I have a mindset that says bipartisanship ought to consist of Democrats coming to the Republican point of view." How has this dialogue from D.C. filtered down to the public, or at least the Republican public of Indiana, where they want to lose somebody who was hardly considered, liberal, let alone a moderate, that he didn't at least pass the litmus test anymore? How did it come to this?
Well, in fact, you're absolutely right about Lugar. He had a lifetime conservative rating from one of the respected conservative groups, respected by conservatives, of 77%. So being more than 3/4 to the right wasn't conservative enough. You really have something going on in the Republican electorate. And that's what I think has happened here that I think we don't pay enough attention to, is that a lot of the people who used to be moderate or moderately conservative Republicans have left the Republican Party. This started happening in the 1990s, not far from, I think, where you're sitting, in the suburbs around Philadelphia. Those used to be a solid base for moderate to moderate conservative Republicanism. They voted strongly for George H.W. Bush. They voted for senators like John Hines, the late John Hines. Those folks stopped voting in Republican primaries, starting in the 1990s. And I don't think the whole country has moved to the right. I think the Republicans are on a journey to the right that I hope they will reconsider after this election. It'll obviously depend on the outcome of this election.
And you also write the progressives here shoulder some of this blame as well, because when people talk about the flyover states or looking down at some of the red states here, and this disdain for populism, you write, they do it at their own detriment.
I'm so glad you picked up on that, particularly sitting here in the New York metro area, because it's one of the things I talk about in the book, that the whole notion of a progressive talking about part of the country as flyover country. First of all, we progressives, supposed to be more open-minded than that. But secondly, if you look at where progressive reform came from, New York was a pioneer in many respects, but it also came right out of the heartland. It came out of states like Minnesota and Wisconsin and Kansas. So I don't like it when Republicans talk about the real America, because they seem to be trying to cut the eastern seaboard, particularly in the Northeast, out of the rest of the country. And I don't like it when progressives talk about flyover country as if the only parts of our country matter are the states on the two coasts.
All right. And again, the book, Our Divided Political Heart. E.J. Dionne, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to head back to the football field. And yes, by now we all know the ref lockout over, but we're asking why the public was on, in effect, Labour side in this particular case, talking about the refs. And, for all people, the anti-union Governor Scott Walker, the poster child, he was with the refs here, and we know where he was with the unions in Wisconsin. We're going to get into the why about that and what it means when we return.